I'm human, so yes, I don't like being rejected as much as the next person. A necessary part of writing features is rejections. And when I first started, most of what you get is rejections. Sometimes the rejection can be, effectively being ghosted. You don't hear back from the commissioning editor at all, so it tells you nothing. But every so often, I'd get a response from one of the commissioning editors, which was hugely useful.
Welcome to Wild Muse, a healing artistic space for creative souls. And today I'm joined by Amanda Tuke, nature writer, botanist, birder, as well as associate lecturer in creative writing at BPAR University. Amanda writes a really lovely monthly column for Birdwatching magazine, which I'm really eager to talk to her about. She also blogs about lots of other really cool subjects, obviously about nature. She talks about her freelance writing journey, her nature writing workshops, and plenty more. So we'll pop links to where you can find Amanda below. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you. Amanda, I want to start with a rather brilliant category that I found on your blog in the drop-down menu under My Journey. And the category is called Great Rejections. So in that category, you've got a blog post entitled things like helpful beyond requirement and your ideas feel too unfocused result. And some rejections make it all worthwhile. So these are blogs where you literally quote comments that you've had back in terms of rejections. So I'd love to dive into what inspired you to put that on your blog. And how is it that you've come to be so positive about your rejections?
Well, I suppose when I started out as a nature writer, and one of the things I'd always wanted to do was to write features. I mean, not all nature writers do that, obviously, but a necessary part of writing features is rejections. And when I first started, and perhaps it applies to everybody, however experienced you are, most of what you get is rejections. But sometimes the rejection can be, effectively being ghosted. You don't hear back from the commissioning editor at all. And of course, that's no use because you don't know whether it was because they thought your idea was rubbish or because somebody had already covered that subject very recently. Or they just have read your writing and it doesn't fit, the style doesn't fit with the publication. So it tells you nothing. But every so often I'd get a response from one of the commissioning editors, which was hugely useful, where they would tell you why they had rejected it. And I kind of felt that they'd gone to all of that trouble. And while I don't name names, it just felt like I could sort of make that point to commissioning editors of how wonderful it is when you start out as a writer to get that kind of feedback so that you have a sense of what you could do next. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I should put it on the blog to share it with other people. And I mean, it is very much a topic of conversation among my writer friends who also write features. I mean, we talk about, rejections a lot. And it's trying to be, the positive thing is trying to be, well, if you've pitched 10 ideas to magazines, that's what matters. And so you're likely to get, at least 9 rejections out of that. And if you're really lucky, one of them will be accepted. So almost the number of rejections is a good thing too. It means you're out there, you're toting your wares, you're doing what you need to do if you want to get published. And so it's, I guess what I would say to anybody who's in that, in that game is that welcome those rejections, and particularly when you get positive feedback, respond to that and say thank you so much for taking the time to respond to me, because then that will encourage commissioning editors to carry on. And lots of them are incredibly generous with their time and feedback. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I could see in one of the blogs, someone was so generous as to give you emails as to where to send it on. I think they even suggested an alternative title that you use. And that was really lovely to read. But going back to another point that you made, which is if you're getting those rejections, it means that you're getting yourself out there. It makes me think of something that a business coach once told me in terms of creating clients. And he said, yes lives in the land of no. And it sounds like it's a similar principle when you're pitching for features, that, yeah, you're going to get 9 no's in a row, but the more no's you get, I suppose, the more chance there is of having a yes.
Absolutely, yes. I've not heard that expression before, but it's lovely. I shall make use of that. Absolutely, that you've got to keep trying and not take it personally. And often the rejections, I mean, if people kept coming back to you saying your writing's not up to scratch, clearly that would be upsetting. But even then, you can do something about that. So it is within our power to change those things. Sometimes there's no way you could have known, for example, they've just commissioned a piece on, I don't know, the bird life of Nepal or whatever it is that you wanted to write about. You just couldn't know that. I mean, there are some things that are probably from a commissioning editor's perspective aren't excusable, and that would be if you obviously hadn't read the magazine. So that's the one thing I always say to my students, is that if you are pitching to BBC Wildlife, it's got to be clear that you have read BBC Wildlife, you have a sense of topics that they've covered, you understand the kind of style that they like their features written in, and anybody can do that. So it's the sort of basics, but then there's some things that you honestly couldn't have known, so it's just bad luck, and then you just keep trying. And it also means that the topic that you're writing about could in fact be the right topic in a year's time, in the same publication or in a different one. So your work and your efforts and research aren't necessarily wasted anyway, so keep trying.
I love this attitude, Amanda, because often I will see that people take it personally. And that's not to say that's not a criticism. I mean, it's so hard not to take it personally, perhaps in the first instance. But what it sounds like to me is you've kind of got a toolkit of where to go after that kind of initial ouch. I mean, I'm assuming you do have that initial kind
Absolutely.
of ouch, but then it sounds like you've got this toolkit of, okay, well, perhaps they've just commissioned something on this subject, or you've got a sort of list of possible reasons as to why they've said no, which aren't just you're never going to make it.
Absolutely. So I'm human, so yes, I don't like being rejected as much as the next person, but it's trying to get over that as quickly as possible, isn't it, and not let it affect your confidence or your desire to keep trying. And I think that's the thing, you have to develop a bit of a thick skin and keep trying, and not let that sort of personal initial impact stay with you for too long, because it will just interfere in your writing. So
yeah, and I wonder if what you mentioned about being really familiar with the magazine that you're sending it to, because that in itself is an act that takes the focus off you and your idea to actually the place where it's going to end up. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that then means that if there's a yes or a no at the end of it, you have a sense of, oh, it was a right fit for that magazine versus, I'm the best or I'm the worst.
Absolutely. So there will be, I mean, my style of writing in the columns for birdwatching is not necessarily a style that would fit all other publications that might take nature writing. So I would have to adapt my style for any particular publication that I was pitching to. And that's another thing that we talk to our students about on the nature writing MA, is that you've got to be prepared to flex. If you're saying I only have one style of writing, I'm only prepared to do this, then you might maybe get a book deal at some point in the future if you're very lucky, but you're unlikely to make it as a feature writer, because you really do have to flex to meet the requirements of any particular publication.
That's really interesting. And what suggestions do you give for someone who wants to start flexing their style?
So as we've just been discussing, obviously the most important thing is to be familiar with what that publication normally commissions. So if you were looking across publications, you might look at the ones that are most similar. You'll publish things that are most similar to your style. And sometimes it can be, sort of minor things like, there might be a publication that never publishes anything in the present tense. I mean, in Birdwatching magazine, I write because I want that sense of immediacy and to try and encourage the reader to feel like they're standing shoulder to shoulder with me, experiencing that bird or wherever I am watching birds. Some publications don't like that and won't publish things in the present tense. So it's being aware of those sort of nuances in the writing. Some publications won't ever use, scientific names, and that's fine. But you need to know that, and there's no reason for you not to know it because you would have looked carefully and seen that. So it's looking at when you're reading through, getting a sense of the kind of length of features, the sort of style of writing, and any of those particular ways that people talk about the natural world in those magazines, and having that awareness. So once you've found somewhere that's reasonably close to how you like writing, it would just be tweaking your piece or finding something to share with them that is closest to that so that they can see your writing style.
And how would you say your styles have evolved or emerged in the times that you've been writing?
Well, so, I mean, I started as a reader, and that was, so I had particular authors that I loved reading, and I used to, and I still do, read the Guardian Country Diary pieces, and I have writers in that I absolutely love, like Amy Gembier and Nicola Chester, and Lev Parakian, and there'll be people like that I think, I learned so much from reading other people's writing. And so I guess over time, I've worked out where my place is. It's not about emulating someone else. It's working out how your style fits in. And, I think it's also worth being aware that, even if you are published, not everybody will like your writing. I would describe the sort of thing I do in the column as being fairly light-hearted. So somebody who is a very hardcore, serious birder might find that irritating. Who knows? But as long as the editor keeps commissioning me, I'll keep writing it. But so there's something there about sort of over time I've become more confident in the kind of thing I like writing, and I've also been able to bring in more science. I mean, I trained as a scientist originally. I have a PhD in plant ecology, and what I love doing is talking to scientists. So whenever I can, I crowbar that into the column. So there's things like that, and I kind of become more confident in doing that over time as I've have a sense that the readers are interested in that. So
yeah, that's interesting to hear that was, you've got that training, and yet it needed that additional component of understanding, people are enjoying the scientific element in the writing to then to I suppose unleash it into your pieces.
Absolutely. And I tie it in. I often talk about citizen science, and certainly they've had letters where people have said, I love the fact that Amanda tells you where you can go and count seabirds on cliffs or contribute to science. So I kind of think that's the way that we can kind of bring people into the world of science and feel part of it. And there's nothing to stop anybody getting involved in citizen science, and I really encourage everybody to.
I love that. So citizen science, is the definition a science where someone can go, like you say, they're counting birds on a cliff, they know where they can go and collect data?
So what often, I suppose this is a function of our kind of digital world, and that the ability to collect data is, compared to 20 years ago when I was researching, people can create massive data sets now relatively easily. So the particular project I'm thinking about there, it was what they took was a series of photographs of sea cliffs, and then they had so many photographs, there was no way that the researchers themselves could go through all of those photographs counting fulmar nests or guillemot nests or whatever they were. And so what they do is they upload that and onto a sort of online platform, and then ask for people to volunteer to go through some of those photographs. So anybody could do that. So that was one project. Another project I talk about is a 3D images were taken of a whole load of bird beaks, all of the ones stored in the Natural History Museum in Tring. I think another couple of natural history museums. So they ended up with a massive set of these 3D images of bird beaks. And once again, there's no way that the scientists by themselves could take the measurements that they needed to from these beaks. So they offer it up to other people and say, if you'd like to do some of that. And I did do that myself, and it was great fun. Really enjoyed it. Measuring bird beaks. Who knew that could be fun?
Wow, that's so random. I love it. There's something about what you're talking about, Amanda, and also I'm thinking of your column on birds as well, that it's sort of making me realize it's accessible on so many levels. And I've been trying to put my finger on it since I've been reading your column, because one of the things that can put me off about some kinds of nature writing is where plants, trees, animals, birds are described just by their name. And because I don't know the name, I already feel lost.
Mm-hmm.
Or I feel that the nature writing that I'm reading about is somebody in a place that I feel I would never get to, and that makes me feel excluded. It makes me feel a bit jealous, I suppose, as well. But one of the things I really loved about your column is, because it's urban, and this is something I want to get into with you, it's nature, but from an urban perspective. And for me, that makes it seem a lot more accessible. Like, for example, within the M25, you've logged 125 species yourself, or
it was something like that last year. Yes, I'm aiming for more this year.
And it really blew my mind. It sort of made me realize how easy it is to up your game and connect with nature, no matter where you are.
No, absolutely. So yes, the urban thing kind of happened sort of not almost by accident, that I became aware, exactly as you said, of just how many birds, for example, you could see inside the M25, and obviously if you'd actually see loads more than that if every time a bird appeared you went rushing off to see it. But I don't do that very often. Occasionally I will, but I love that idea that simply by having a greater sense of awareness you will see things. I mean, I sit in my office as I am now, looking out the window here, and I'm incredibly lucky. I live next to a woodland, but just watching birds flying over, and as you build up a sense of what they are, and getting better at identifying them, you realize that we're missing a whole lot of stuff, just by not knowing enough about it to notice what those things are. And it started with birds and plants, and now I've started noticing many more things, so becoming interested in vertebrates and amphibians. So trying to not be too much of just a birder and a botanist, but trying to sort of build up my knowledge as an all-round naturalist. But yes, I see myself very much as an urban naturalist. And that doesn't mean I think I'm an expert, because, being a naturalist is enthusiasm and learning about nature too. And that's what I want to try and capture in my writing, is that sense of how you might go about learning a little bit more. So I talk about, my learning journey, as well as the things that I see, and also the reality of it, because you'll probably have seen in the columns that sometimes I go out to look for birds and I don't see them. So I've just written a piece about a city visit to Manchester, where the thing I really wanted to see while I was there was a willow tit. Willow tits are now extinct in London. I mean, they were the last one was recorded at in the beginning of the 2000s. So very sadly, we've lost them from London, but they are regularly seen in Greater Manchester. So there I am, sort of out for the day in sail, trying to find a willow tit, and I don't find one. And so that's a spoiler. But in the journey of looking for one, of course, I find lots of other lovely things, and I had a lovely time. Wonderful plants, wonderful other birds. It had that real sense of, I've experienced spring properly. So it doesn't matter, and it's trying to get across to people because much of birding can be very sort of results driven. That you go somewhere, you have to see this bird. If you don't see the bird, then everything is a disaster. Or what you've dipped is what birders call it. So it's trying to get away from that and say it's quite fun to have that quest of I'm going off to see a willow tit, but that's all it is a quest, and it doesn't necessarily have to have an end point. And hopefully I get that across.
Oh, you do, because I think one of the ones that I read was a trip to Cardiff with your friend Wendy. No, not Wendy.
Cindy.
Yep,
Cindy.
And you'd gone to see a particular type of duck that has
a ring-necked duck. Yes,
yeah,
which is quite rare. So yeah.
And I loved it because you're there, you don't see it, but the piece is engaging. You're seeing other things, you're experiencing other things. And then at the end of the piece, Cindy messages with a photo like 2 days later of the duck. And actually, because I'd read those blogs that you've got on rejection, and then I was reading that piece, it sort of made me wonder if these experiences of sometimes seeing the bird, sometimes not seeing the bird, but always being able to enjoy the journey is possibly translating rather beneficially into other areas of your life.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. I mean, perhaps I'm just eternally optimistic, and I suppose I kind of think, well, okay, I didn't see the ring-necked duck this time, but I do know now that Cardiff is somewhere that potentially I could go and see ring-necked ducks in the future. So I keep I just have in the back of my mind that sort of sense of, well, maybe next time. I mean, my writing for Birdwatching magazine started with spending a winter, it would have been the winter between 2018 and 19, chasing around London looking for waxwings, which are birds that migrate here from the north, and when there's a cold winter and they run out of berries in Scandinavia or wherever they are, they can make it down as far as London. And I rushed around London. I've still had a proper job at that point, so I kind of duck out of the job whenever I could and go and look for these waxwings, and never saw them. And they kept popping up in London, and I'd be either too early or too late, or etc., etc. And that was the first thing I had published in Birdwatching magazine. And I was surprised, and I said to my tutor at the time, Stephen Moss, "But why would they want it? It doesn't have any birds in it." But they did publish it. And then this year, the waxwings were back. They haven't really been back in numbers. And so there I was in Balham on Boxing Day at dawn, standing in a residential street, looking up at a tree which was filled with waxwings. So, but at the time, back in 2018-19, I'd have told you it was hopeless because I'd looked everywhere for them.
Yeah.
So, but I don't ever give up.
I do. I mean, for me, this just brings me so much joy, Amanda, because I do feel that our thinking can get really stuck. Like you described yourself as an eternal optimist. You've got this frame of mind that something's always going to turn up, or, you are going to see it at some point. And I think there are some people who don't have that frame of mind. But also, I think if you dug a little deeper, perhaps people with less optimistic frames of mind or more doom and gloom, it might be that actually how much time are they spending in nature and sort of allowing nature to teach them about there's always a cycle, things come and go.
Yeah, I can see it's difficult, and certainly I have friends who are naturalists who, find it, I mean, being in nature can be absolutely wonderful. It can be bittersweet too. I mean, with the climate crisis, and as I was saying, so we're losing species in London. If you focus too much on that, clearly it would be very hard to get a great deal of pleasure out of nature, because what you'd be noticing would be the absences. So for me, it's about finding some way of caring about the climate crisis and doing what you can whether that's volunteering in your local nature reserve or spending time doing surveys or whatever it is. Doing that and trying to not focus too much on, the sort of negative side, simply because that achieves nothing. So, it doesn't help you being filled with doom and gloom. I know this is easy to say, but if we're filled with doom and gloom, there's not very much we're going to be able to do to turn things around. And the critical thing for me, and particularly in urban areas, is we've got to find the things that are there, because if we don't know what's there, we're not going to be able to push back when any of them are threatened by development or whatever. So there's a really critical thing for me about we've got to know, we need people to know about things, because if they don't know about things, they won't care about them. And so that's in terms of me talking to people, taking people out on pavement plant walks, for example, it's trying to get people excited about the plants that live in your street, because then when your council comes down the road and sprays glyphosate all over them, you can at least, know why it's a bad thing and why they didn't need to do that, and what other councils are doing differently. So it's trying to get that across to my readers as well.
That seems so important, and it's making me think of something you said earlier about the self-awareness to see all those species of birds within the M25, but also knowing what you're looking for. And I think there's many of us who either don't have that self-awareness because, let's say, we're fixed on our phones, or we're fixed on stressful things that are happening at work. And so we get that tunnel vision. And so we don't spot, you've been spotting these buzzards flying past your study window. So we don't spot that buzzard flying past the window, and we don't get that sort of magical little hello from nature. But also, like you say, if we don't know what we're looking for, like I love the idea of someone showing me the plants that are growing on the pavement. So it makes me imagine that perhaps when I'm walking down the street, rather than sort of churning in my mind about some recent argument I might have had with someone, I'm spotting these different colours and these different leaf shapes, and I'm able to know what I'm seeing. And I think that would just transform my experience of life. But also, like you say, it would make our relationship with what's current, what's still here, meaningful, and therefore put us in a position to save what's still here.
And definitely, and when I have taken people out on those walks, many of them say afterwards that they will not look at a pavement the same ever again. I mean, you can walk through or walk down a busy urban street. You can focus on the boarded up shops and the rubbish and the dog mess, or you can spot the plants. And once you start seeing the plants, the rest of it just fades into the background. So I don't know. And sometimes I just find, some of my favourite plants. There's a beautiful flower that we have on streets around here called Shaggy Soldier, which is a lovely name anyway. It's a little kind of daisy-like thing. And it's from Mexico, and it thrives on our streets. It just makes me smile whenever I see it. It's such a little chirpy plant. And once you've started focusing in on those things and recognizing kind of old friends as you're walking down the street, little plant friends, it just makes you feel differently about the street. So now my streets are, past the corner where the Jersey cudweed normally grows, and so everything is sort of mapped out. So I go out to see whether that plant has come up again, and whether it's in flower yet. So you just have a different way of seeing a street. So that, with the birds as well, is just wonderful.
It's so lovely to just get a sense of what it's like, not completely to be in your shoes, but to get a sense of what it's like. Like, I love the way you said, okay, we can look at the shops that are boarded up, we can look at the dog mess, or we can see this lovely plant that's come from Mexico. Like, immediately that sort of really excites my storyteller's mind, because I'm like, how on earth did it get here?
Well, that's a good question, and obviously it's something that botanists debate a lot. But it's the wonderful thing about London being a melting pot. In the same way that it's a melting pot of people, it's a melting pot of plants, and it reflects kind of international trade. And so there's plants come here for all different reasons, and that's, what I tend to do on walks is explain to people where the plant has come from. This is from Mount Etna. This is probably how it got here. And not all of it's good stories. Sometimes you're looking at plants that are quite invasive in other parts of the world and have been brought in, usually with garden plants. So it's but they're all interesting stories, and so it's just it just makes you look at the street differently, and you can enjoy it. And it's also a way, you were talking about, for somebody who doesn't yet know the names of things, starting in your own street is what I would encourage everybody to do. So you start off with one plant outside your garden gate or in front of your block of flats. One plant, find out what that one plant is. And if you are somebody who's glued to your phone, at the very least, what you have there is a sort of gold mine of information in your phone. So there are various apps that you can use where you just point them at the plant and it'll give you a good idea of what it might be. There's also a fantastic birdsong app called Merlin that's free, that was developed by Cornell University, which you literally just record birdsong and it will tell you what it is. So that's a fantastic place to start, particularly in urban areas where you hear something and you think, I can't quite see that bird, so it makes it very hard to identify it. But I can hear it singing. It's probably a robin. It almost always is a robin. But yeah, it just means that you begin that journey, and once you've learnt the first one, then the next one is easier to add, etc., etc.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, the bird app, because in one of your columns you talk about the fact that you're improving your skills in being able to listen to a bird song and know what kind of bird it was. And I was in such awe of that. I remember meeting the poet David Morley, who is utterly fascinated with bird sounds. It was when I was working at the John Osborne Arvon Centre, one of the Arvon writing retreats, and he'd come to do a poetry writing retreat. And he had this incredible contraption that was like a cone with what looked like a small light bulb in the middle, but it was a recording device. And he was going around making these incredible recordings of bird song. And I think what really struck me in that moment was how much it sounds to me like a cacophony. Like I'm out here in quite thick nature and it just sounds like a cacophony. And I was really curious when I listened to you, when I read about you listening to bird sounds and being able to determine what's there. What do you suggest if you've got a sense of, like, I feel like there are hundreds of birds chirping all around me? Is it still possible to start to pick them out?
Definitely. So I liked your word cacophony. The thing I always find quite distressing is people talking about a chorus, because it definitely isn't a chorus. Those birds are all, they're all fighting each other to get their moment in the moment of glory. But that is, in when you do have that sense of there's loads of different birds singing, that's when Merlin really comes into use, because it will pick out the birds it can hear and identify them for you. So even now, quite often what I'll do is, if I'm walking through the local woods to go to the train station, I'll quite often be listening out for birds, but I'll have Merlin on, sort of in my hand. So I'll think, there's a robin, there's a chiff-chaff, I think there's a chaffinch over there. When I get to the gate, I'll look and see what Merlin found, as a kind of, what did I miss? Because it records it too, so you can, play it back. But once it's like anything, isn't it? When you first start learning something, it all seems impossible. It seems it's so complicated. Where on earth would you start? But, I was joking about most things are a robin. In a city, you're very likely to hear a robin. And once you've worked out which the robin is, then you recognize the things that aren't robins.
Oh, yes.
It's almost a sort of, so you think, yeah, that's the robin. And robins do have a beautiful, beautiful song. It's incredible. The purity of I'm a musician as well. The purity of the note is absolutely lovely. They have a very particular voice. And that's how bird song apps work. It's not so much is the pattern precise. It's about what is the voice that this bird has. What is the sonogram that it produces. So yeah, get to know robin song, and then everything else will start to come from that. So, and then I guess it's like kind of doing a dissection of that cacophony to see what, I've got this, there's the robin, there's the blackbird, there's a wren over there's something else, I'm not quite sure what it is, it's over here. So you just work your way through it does involve a little bit of time, but what could be more pleasant than spending time listening to birds?
I'm so with you on that, and that was also something that I really got from reading your column, which was a sense of how much you enjoy spending your time doing this, and you make the time to do it. Like one of the sections, I think this was the March column where you've gone back and you're talking about January. And I think on sort of day 4 of the diary, you're like, work's piling up at home, but I still just had to sneak out to Crystal Palace on the way to the supermarket. And I think that also had such a beautiful impact on me, because I think reading nature writing for me is such a pleasure. But also when I'm reading about other people's enjoyment of aspects of nature that I haven't yet acquired because I'm intimidated. I don't know what birds are. Your column made it accessible, but it also reminded me that it's such a pleasure for you. You sort of can't stop yourself doing it.
No, absolutely. It is. It's a compulsion, and I suppose part of the reason that that we decided to call the column the 30-minute birder was because, even if you do have a tiny bit of time, you can still squeeze in some birding. So, I love nature writers who seem to spend all their time in nature. That's wonderful, but that's not reality for most people. Most of us, you have I have my kids, caring responsibilities, you have other things you have to do. And so it's offering people that idea that, well, even if you've got 5 minutes, even if you can't actually go into nature, you could use your Merlin app and listen to some robin singing, or there's always something that you could do to squeeze it in. So 30 minutes was that sort of idea that you could do that. I mean, I remember on the way to the supermarket, where I live in South London, I drive into the supermarket and I can hear a peregrine calling, and I was thinking, where is that coming from? This seems so unlikely that a peregrine would be here calling. And of course I track it down to the loudspeakers on the side of the supermarket, and they play the sound of a peregrine calling to try and keep the starlings away. But who knew? So it was one of those things I thought, if I hadn't been kind of thinking about birds and enjoying the starlings, then I would have missed that probably. So it's wherever you are, whatever you're doing, there are always plants and there are nearly always birds.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of tuning into that, blocking out the noise of the traffic, and having that, as you say, trying not to think about what you're going to cook for dinner and what you need to do next, and just being in the moment and thinking about what you can hear and what you can see.
Yeah.
There'll be stuff that you're missing, and it's
just,
the more people see it, the better.
Amanda, this has been so rich. I want to end with one final question, and this comes from another exploration of your blog. I love these posts as well. As someone who works as a coach, I love people who talk about goals. So you have these amazing posts where you do a review of the previous year and you talk about goals that you've got for the upcoming year. And so I was able to glean your celebration at finding a literary agent, which was obviously very exciting for you. And then you talked about being approached to write a book, but the time scale was just crazy and you wouldn't have been able to do it, but that obviously you still have that as a desire. So that's what I was curious about. For a more of a long form project, is there something that you would love to really explore deeply? Have you got an ongoing project?
I have the beginnings of a project. It's very, very early days. That I'm working on with my agent, Agent Tom, and I suppose it would be no surprise if urban nature featured heavily in that. I mean, as you know, that's the thing that I feel very passionately about.
Yeah.
Um, but as I said, it's very early days. But watch this space,
Mm.
and yeah, and it was sad that the other project didn't work out, but it really was, quite unfeasible if I hadn't worked kind of 20 hours a day, so without doing anything else. So sometimes you have to say no to things if they don't work out. If it's not
Yeah,
really
I was
sensible.
actually quite impressed by that, Amanda, because not only is there so much of your writing that gave me such interesting glimpses of you as a person, but when I read that, I just thought there has to be a certain amount of confidence to sort of not completely give yourself away. You're like, actually, this isn't going to be manageable for me. And I wonder if there's that sort of unconscious trust, there'll be another opportunity that comes along.
Possibly, I mean, there was a degree of self-protection. I just thought, I'm not going to make I've had those kind of jobs in the past where, that where I knew they weren't doing my emotional well-being much good,
Yeah.
and part of the reason of giving up that kind of work and becoming a writer was to get away from that and have that sense of that I do have some control over it. So it would seem ridiculous to then kind of cause that same sort of level of stress to myself. But was it confidence? I think it goes back to the optimism. I think it's, I mean, I'm making the assumption that that's not actually going to damage my writing career in the long term. But
Yeah.
it would have been fun. It was a great publisher. I would have enjoyed doing it. And I'm waiting to see whether they did find somebody to do it within the time scale. I've not
Yeah.
seen any news about it yet. So but yeah, so my own book project would be sort of even better. So that's what I'm hoping for.
On your own timescale.
Yes, absolutely.
Amanda, thank you so much for talking to me today. I just want to take a moment with you just to reflect, because it might be that in the things that we talked about, there was a moment that I didn't ask you a question and you thought, oh, it would have been great to have just mentioned that. Or it might be that having spent the last 40 minutes chatting, there's something that's just been bubbling away in the back of your mind that you want to voice. So is there anything I didn't ask, or anything that's just bubbled up that wants to be voiced?
I suppose, I mean, we talked at the start about other writers and how how you begin writing and what might encourage people. And so I suppose what I would say is just do it. You've got to start writing. I mean, do it today. Don't put it off. There's not a right time to write. And if you're interested in writing about nature, I mean, I started by literally keeping a nature diary and saying, just been in the woods, saw 3 swifts. So it started off very kind of, sort of just records like that. And I still keep those kind of records now, and they're incredibly useful because you think, when was it I saw that hairy-footed flabby? And you've got something that you can go back and check when it was. So start doing that. Keep a diary, because that will, it's just a lovely thing anyway, and it's just a way of noting. But I just think begin. And you won't regret it, and you'll get so much fun from it. And don't worry too much about the getting published at this point. Somewhere down the line, think about that. But start writing, because it's just such a natural kind of that thing of recording and noticing, and in a sort of mindful way. And that's what you're doing effectively in a nature diary.
That's beautiful. And this idea of the recording, that was actually something else that I really liked about your column, where at the end of each day you put a tally of how many birds you've seen.
Oh yeah, so that was the first week of the year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But that's not something I do. That was only that particular.
Yeah, but even that, it's just a reminder of the things that are there to be noticed, the things that are there to be honoured. So, to be honest, Amanda, what it made me think of was like, oh my goodness, this woman's in a city right now. I'm out here surrounded by woodland and trees and hedges, and I was really curious as to how many different species I would see if I went exploring for half an hour a day for a week. Obviously, I'd have to find out what they are first, but again, and I wondered if that sort of came from those initial diaries that you mentioned. You just sort of got into the habit of those tallies, and it was interesting.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in the countryside and didn't notice things like that. So I think maybe there's something about they're even more precious in urban areas. And there is also a sense that, if you take urban and suburban areas, we have an extraordinary number of species. Whereas you can be in some areas of the countryside, particularly where it's very, there's sort of very heavy agriculture, where actually you wouldn't see loads of species at all. So there's no guarantee that being in rural areas means that you will see more things. So
Yeah.
there's lots to be said for bird watching and general looking at nature in urban areas.
Yeah. I'll be putting a link to, because I know you've actually got a writing workshop and you've got an urban walk coming up. Am I right in saying that?
So I have, certainly I've got definitely plant walks coming up, a possible bird walk coming up soon, and they will all be advertised on my website. So yes, so
Great.
And anything I do will always be on the Urban Naturalist website.
Perfect. So we'll pop links below. We'll pop your Twitter below where people can connect with you there as well.
Great.
Amanda, thank you so much. This has been such a treat for me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.